Hello, and welcome to the 27th episode of Scripture in a Year series hosted by Saints Peter and Paul Orthodox Church in the Albanian Archdiocese of the OCA. Today's readings are from Leviticus Chapters 13 through 16. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "When a man has a scar on the surface of his skin or a shiny spot, and it appears to be a leprous infection, he is to be brought to Aaron the priest, or one of his sons the priests. The priest shall examine the infection on the surface of his skin, and if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears deeper than the surface of his skin, it is a leprous infection. Thus the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. But if the shiny spot on the surface of his skin is white, but appears to be no more than skin deep, and its hair has not turned white, but is dark, the priest shall quarantine him for 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him on the 7th day, and indeed, if the infection appears as it was, and it has not spread on the skin, the priest shall quarantine him another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and indeed, if the infection is dark and has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a spot, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the spot happens to spread at all on the skin, after he was seen by the priest for his cleansing, then he must be seen by the priest again. So if the priest sees the spot has indeed spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the leprous infection is on a man, he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the scar on the skin is white, and has turned the hair white, and some of the flesh in the scar is healthy and alive, it is an old leprosy on the surface of his skin. The priest shall pronounce him unclean, and shall quarantine him, for he is unclean. But if leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and covers from head to foot all the skin of the one with the infection, according to the full examination of the priest, then the priest shall consider, and indeed, if the leprosy covers the entire surface of his skin, he shall pronounce clean him who has the infection, because it all turned white. He is clean. But in whatever day an opened wound appears on him, he shall be unclean. Thus the priest shall examine the open wound and pronounce him unclean, for an open wound is unclean. It is leprosy. But if the surface of the skin is restored and turns white again, he shall come to the priest. The priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the infection has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him clean who has the infection. He is clean. If one's body develops an ulcer in the skin, and it is healed, and in the place of the ulcer there comes a white scar or a shiny or inflamed spot, it shall be shown to the priest. When the priest sees it, and indeed it appears deeper than the skin, and its hair has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy which broke out in the ulcer. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there is no white hair in it, and it is not deeper than the skin's surface, but is dark, the priest shall quarantine him 7 days. But if it should spread over the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection which broke out in the ulcer. But if the shiny spot stays in one place and has not spread, it is the scar of the ulcer, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if one's body receives a burn on its skin by fire, and the open wound of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, the priest shall examine it, and indeed, if the hair of the bright spot has turned white, and it appears deeper than the skin, it is leprosy broken out in the burn. Therefore the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there are no white hairs in the bright spot, and it is not deeper than the skin, but it is dark, then the priest shall quarantine him 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If it has at all spread over the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection broken out in the ulcer. But if the bright spot stays in one place and has not spread on the skin, but is dark, it is a scar from the burn. The priest shall pronounce him clean. If a man or woman appears to have a leprous infection on the head or the beard, and the priest shall examine the infection, and indeed it appears deeper than the skin, and there is a thin yellow hair in it, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a lesion, a leprosy of the head or beard. But if the priest examines the infection of the lesion, and indeed it does not appear deeper than the skin, and there is no thin yellow hair in it, the priest shall quarantine 7 days the one who has the infection of the lesion. Then on the 7th day the priest shall examine the infection, and indeed if the lesion has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the indentation does not appear deeper than the skin, he shall shave himself, but he shall not shave the lesion. Then the priest shall quarantine another 7 days the one who has the lesion. On the 7th day the priest shall examine the lesion, and indeed, if the lesion has not spread over the skin, and the indentation does not appear deeper than the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the lesion happens to spread at all on the skin after his cleansing, the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the lesion has spread over the skin, the priest need not seek for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if the lesion appears to be at a standstill and there is black hair grown up in it, the lesion has healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. If a man or woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, specifically shining white spots, the priest shall look, and indeed, if the bright spots on the skin of the body are shining white spots, it is eczema. He is clean. As for the man whose hair has fallen from his head, he is bald, but he is clean. He whose hair has fallen from his forehead, he is bald on the forehead, but he is clean. Now if there is on the bald head or bald forehead a reddish-white infection, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the infection of the reddish-white skin on his bald head or on his bald forehead is like the form of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His infection is on his head. Now the clothes of the leper on whom the infection is shall be torn, and his head uncovered, and he shall cover his mouth, and he shall be called unclean. He shall be unclean. All the days he has the infection, he shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell apart. His way of life shall be outside the camp. Also, if a garment has a leprous infection in it, whether it is a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it is in the warp or woof of linen or wool, whether it is in leather or in anything made of leather, and if the infection is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather, whether in the warp or in the woof, or in anything made of leather, then it is a leprous infection and must be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the infection and quarantine him who has the infection 7 days. Then he shall examine the infection on the 7th day. If the infection has spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, in the leather, or in anything made of leather, the infection is an active leprosy, it is unclean. Therefore he shall burn the garment with the infection, whether the warp or woof or wool or linen, or anything of leather, for it is an active leprosy. The garment shall be burned in the fire. But if the priest examines it, and indeed the infection is not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything made of leather, then the priest shall order the object with the infection to be washed, and he shall quarantine it another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine the infection after it is washed, and indeed, if the infection has not changed its color, though the infection has not spread, it is unclean. It shall be burned in the fire, for it is firmly established in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof. If the priest examines it, and indeed the infection is dark after washing it, he shall tear it out of the garment, whether out of the warp or of the woof or of the leather. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything made of leather, it is a spreading leprosy, and that garment with the infection shall be burned with fire. But if you wash the garment, either warp or woof, or anything made of leather, and the infection disappeared from it, then it shall be washed a 2nd time, and shall be clean. This is the law of the leprous infection in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or woof, or anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This shall be the law of the leper for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall go out of the camp and the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the leprous infection is healed in the leper, the priest shall give orders to take for the one declared clean 2 small birds, live and clean, and also cedar wood and scarlet and hyssop. Then the priest must give orders that one of the birds must be killed in an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, and the cedar wood, the scarlet and hyssop, and dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird killed over the running water. Then he shall sprinkle the water 7 times on the one cleansed from his leprosy, and he shall be clean. Then he shall send away the living bird into a field, and the one who is cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and wash himself in water, and he shall be clean. After this he shall come into the camp, and shall stay outside his tent 7 days. But on the 7th day he shall shave all the hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. All his hair he shall shave off. He shall wash his clothes and wash his body in the water, and shall be clean. Then on the 8th day he shall take 2 one-year-old lambs without blemish, 1-year-old sheep without blemish, 3/10 of the finest wheaten flour for a grain offering, mixed with oil, and also 1 cup of oil. Then together with these things the priest who cleanses shall present before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of testimony the man to be made cleansed. The priest shall then take 1 lamb and offer it as a trespass offering, and the cup of oil, and set them apart as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he shall kill the lamb in the place where he kills the sin offering and the whole burnt offering in a holy place, for the sin offering is the priest's, so is the trespass offering. It is most holy. The priest shall take some of the blood of the trespass offering and put it on the tip of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall also take some of the oil from the cup and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. Then he shall dip his right finger in the oil in his left hand and sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the Lord. The priest shall then put some of the remaining oil on the tip of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, and also on the thumb of his right hand, the big toe of his right foot, and on the blood of the trespass offering. Then the priest shall put the rest of the oil on the head of the one to be cleansed. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord. Afterward the priest shall offer the sin offering, and by it make atonement for the one to be cleansed. Then he shall kill the whole burnt offering. The priest shall offer the whole burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar before the Lord. Thus the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be clean. But if he is poor and cannot afford it, he shall take the lamb as a choice portion for a trespass offering, along with 1/10 of fine flour mixed with oil, and a cup of oil as a grain offering, and 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he is able to afford. One shall be a sin offering and the other a burnt offering, to make atonement for him. He shall bring them to the priest on the 8th day for his cleansing, to the door of the tabernacle of testimony before the Lord. The priest shall take the lamb of the trespass offering and the cup of oil and put them as a deposit before the Lord. Then the priest shall kill the lamb of the trespass offering and take some of its blood and put it on the tip of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, then on the thumb of his right hand and the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall then pour some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand and sprinkle with his right finger some of the oil in his left hand 7 times before the Lord. Then the priest shall put some of the oil in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, and also on the thumb of his right hand and the big toe of his right foot, on the place of the blood of the trespass offering. The rest of the oil in the priest's hand he shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before the Lord. After this he shall offer one of the turtle doves or young pigeons, such as he can afford. One is a sin offering, and the other is a whole burnt offering, with the grain offering. Thus the priest shall make atonement for the one to be cleansed before the Lord. This is the law for one who has leprous infection, who cannot afford the usual cleansing. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, When you enter the land of Canaan, which I give you as a possession, and I put the leprous infection in a house in the land of your possession, and he who owns the house comes and tells the priest, saying, It seems to me there is an infection in my house. Then before the priest goes into the house to examine the infection, he shall give orders for them to empty the house, that everything in the house may not become unclean. Afterward the priest shall enter the house to examine it. He shall examine the infection, and indeed if the plague on the walls of the house has greenish or reddish depressions that appear to be deep in the walls, then the priest shall go outside the house to the door of the house and quarantine the house 7 days. After this, the priest shall come again on the 7th day to examine it, and indeed, if the infection has spread on the walls of the house, then the priest shall give orders to take away the stones with the infection, and they shall cast them into an unclean place outside the city. They shall then scrape the house inside and outside, and the dust they scrape off they shall pour out in an unclean place outside the city. And they shall take other scraped stones, and put them in the place of those stones, and they shall take other mortar and plaster the house. Now if the infection comes back and breaks out in the house, after they took away the stones and scraped and plastered the house, then the priest shall enter the house to examine it, and indeed if the infection has spread in it, there is an active leprosy in the house, it is unclean. So they shall break down the house, its stones, timber, and all its plaster, and carry them outside the city to an unclean place. Moreover, he who goes into the house at all while it is quarantined shall be unclean until evening. Also the one who lies down in the house shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And the one who eats in the house shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. But if the priest enters the house to examine it, and indeed the infection has not spread at all in the house after it was plastered, then the priest shall pronounce it clean, because the infection is healed. Then, to cleanse the house, he shall take 2 live birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop, and he shall kill one of the birds in an earthen vessel over running water. And he shall take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet, and the living bird, and dip them in the blood of the slain bird, and in the running water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. Thus he shall cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, the running water, and the living bird, along with the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the spun scarlet. Then he shall send away the living bird into a field outside the city, and make atonement for the house, and it shall be clean. This is the law for any leprous infection and lesion, and for a leprous garment, a house, a scar, a mark, and a bright spot, to determine in which day there is the unclean, and in which day it will be declared clean. This is the law of leprosy. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, to any and every man, when any man has a seminal discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. This shall be the law of his uncleanness. Whether his bodily member flows with an involuntary discharge of his semen, or is stopped up by his discharge, it is his uncleanness. Every bed on which he who has the discharge lies is unclean, and everything on which he sits shall be unclean. Whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything in which he who has the discharge sat shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches the skin of him who has the discharge shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If he who has the discharge spits on him who is clean, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Any saddle of a donkey on which he who has the discharge rides shall be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything under him shall be unclean until evening, and whoever carries any of those things shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whomever he who has the discharge touches, and has not rinsed his hand in water, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. An earthen vessel that he who has the discharge touches shall be broken, and every wooden vessel shall be rinsed in water. Now when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing. He shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, Then he shall be clean. On the 8th day he shall take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring those before the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of testimony, and give them to the priest. Then the priest shall offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a whole burnt offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord because of his discharge. If any man has an emission of semen, he shall wash all his body in water and be unclean until evening. Any garment and any leather on which there is semen shall be washed with water and be unclean until evening. Also, when a woman lies with a man and there is an emission of semen, they shall bathe in water and be unclean until evening. If a woman has a discharge, and the discharge from her body is blood, she shall be in her menstrual period 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on during her menstruation shall be unclean. Also everything she sits on shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she sat on shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If anything is on her bed, or anything on which she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until evening. If any man lies with her, and her uncleanness is on him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days other than at the time of her menstruation, or if it runs beyond this time, all the days of her unclean discharge shall be as the days of her menstruation. She shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her menstruation, and whatever she sits on shall be unclean, as the uncleanness of her menstruation. Whoever touches her shall be unclean, and he shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. Then on the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest, to the door of the tabernacle of testimony. The priest shall offer one as a sin offering, and the other as a whole burnt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her before the Lord because of the discharge of her uncleanness. Thus you shall make the children of Israel ungodly because of their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my tabernacle among them. This is the law for one who has a discharge, and who emits semen, and is unclean thereby, and for her who is indisposed because of her menstrual period, and for the one who has a discharge, either man or woman, and for the man who lies with her during her menstrual period. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, when they offered strange fire before the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil, in the presence of the mercy seat, on the ark of the testimony, lest he die. For I will be seen in the cloud above the mercy seat. Thus Aaron shall come into the holy place with a young bull of the oxen as a sin offering, and a ram as a whole burnt offering. He shall put the holy linen tunic and the linen trousers on his body, and he shall be girded with a linen sash, and with the linen turban he shall be attired. These are holy garments. Therefore he shall wash his body in water and put them on. Then he shall take from the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goats as a sin offering, and 1 ram as a whole burnt offering. Aaron shall offer the young bull as his sin offering to make atonement for himself and his house. He shall take the 2 kids and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of testimony. Then Aaron casts lots for the 2 kids, 1 lot for the Lord and the other lot for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the kid on which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering. But the kid on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement upon it, to let it go as the scapegoat into the desert. Then Aaron shall offer the young bull as his sin offering to make atonement for himself and his house. Thus he shall kill the young bull as a sin offering. He shall then take a censer full of burning coals of the fire from the altar before the Lord, with his hands full of the incense compound, beaten fine, and bring it inside the veil. He shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat on the testimonies, lest he die. He shall take some of the young bull's blood with his finger and sprinkle it upon the east side of the mercy seat 7 times. After that he shall kill the kid of the sin offering before the Lord on behalf of the people, and bring some of its blood inside the veil. Do with that blood as he did with the blood of the young bull, and sprinkle it upon the east side of the mercy seat 7 times. So he shall make atonement in the holy place because of the impurities and injustices of the children of Israel for all their sins. And thus he shall do in the tabernacle of testimony, built among them in the midst of their uncleanness. There shall be no man in the tabernacle of testimony when he goes in to make atonement in the holy place, until he comes out, that he may make atonement for himself, his household, and all the congregation of the children of Israel. Then he shall go out to the altar before the Lord and make atonement upon it. And he shall take some of the blood of both the young bull and the kid, and put it on the horns of the altar all around. Then he shall sprinkle some of the blood upon it with his finger 7 times, and cleanse and sanctify it, because of the impurities of the children of Israel. When Aaron shall finish making atonement in the holy place, the tabernacle of testimony, and the altar, and shall also cleanse matters concerning the priest, then he shall bring the living kid. Aaron shall place his hands on the head of the living kid, confess over it all the transgressions of the children of Israel, and all their lawlessness and their sins, and he shall put them on the head of the living kid, and send it away to the desert by the hand of a suitable man. The kid shall bear on itself all their wrongdoings to an uninhabited land. Thus he shall send away the kid into the desert. Then Aaron shall come into the tabernacle of testimony, and take off the linen garments he put on when he went into the holy place. And he shall leave them there. He shall then wash his body with water in the holy place, put on his garments, and come out to offer his whole burnt offering and the whole burnt offering of the people, to make atonement for himself, his house, the people, and in matters concerning the priests. The fat of the sin offering he shall offer on the altar. He who sent away the kid, which was set apart for remission, shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. The young bull and the kid for the sin offerings, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, shall be carried outside the camp, and they shall burn them in the fire, their skin, their flesh, and their offal. Then he who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. This shall be an ordinance forever for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall humble your souls and do no work at all, whether a native of your own country or a resident alien who dwells among you. For on that day the priest shall make atonement for you, to cleanse you from all your sins before the Lord. Thus you shall be clean. It is a Sabbath of Sabbaths, a rest for you. You shall humble your souls. It is an ordinance forever. So the priest who is anointed and consecrated to minister as priest in his father's place shall make atonement and put on the linen clothes, the holy garments. Then he shall make atonement in the most holy place, the tabernacle of testimony, and the altar. And he shall make atonement for matters concerning the priests and all the congregation. So this shall be an ordinance forever for you, to make atonement for the children of Israel for all their sins. And he shall do this once a year, as the Lord gave orders to Moses. Here ends the reading for today.